Hey everyone, presenting Unit 4. The reading for this week was written by Tongwei Hu. Um, and the topic for this week is the cloud. So, the cloud, from my initial understanding of it, from what I believe the general understanding of it, the cloud is something that is invisible, sort of like Wi-Fi, that enables you to store information as well as access information. Sometimes that information is public, sometimes that information is private. One obvious example that I would think of in terms of using the cloud would be accessing Google, whether that be using Google's cloud services to store things like photographs and videos and personal information, or accessing Google for the sake of finding information such as when a business is open. For example, I can look up a haircut place to schedule an appointment to get my haircut because I'm starting to look like a mad scientist. Just a general understanding of what cloud services provide to the general public, such as people like myself, such as people that you yourselves might consider yourselves to be. But according to the reading, there is much more to the cloud than I anticipated. A lot more to the cloud than what I believed most of us would have anticipated. So, the cloud, relying on fragility for maximum usability. This idea of the cloud was first evidenced by a 1922 design for predicting weather by using a grid of computers or human calculators connected by telegraphs. So, obviously back in 1922, computers were considered to be people who compute data for the sake of research, predicting weather, like this example just provided, or doing mathematical things that nowadays a computer would do. The cloud, summed up, it is to administrate a network that one has direct knowledge of within the same epistemic space as something that constantly fluctuates and is impossible to know. The cloud is amorphous. It relies on servers, hard drives, routers, fiber optic cables, and networks. So the cloud is this thing that is kind of meant to be seen as invisible, but is not invisible. It relies on all of these physical things that can be considered to be layers. These physical things talk to one another in order to store data, access data, provide data for a user who is trying to access that information from a network. Let's see. As I stated, each layer depends on the more material layers below it to work, but it doesn't need to know the exact implementation of these layers. So these layers don't necessarily have like a set status quo in place. So long as they meet a certain criteria, they're able to effectively create the amorphous being that is the cloud. All right. There are three categories of primary sources for the cloud. 1. Representations and anticipations of the cloud in U.S. popular media, legal and political records, and corporate advertisements. So in order to, of course, understand the cloud, it's a lot easier to break it up into individual categories, because what I just stated at the beginning of the video as, the average consumer's cloud, there's a lot more to it, such as the example that I just provided, representations and anticipations in popular U.S. media, political records, and whatnot. 2. Examples drawn from the culture of computer science itself, terms that humanize the subjects like deadlink rather than 404 error. So this example is meant to lean more towards engineers who work within cloud services. And we just tend to, I think, as humans, apply human attributes. I know we've kind of talked about this in our previous units. Apply human attributes to technology in order to make it easier to grasp, such as naming a 404 error a dead link. It's a bit easier to understand and it's a lot easier to communicate. Third category of a primary source for the cloud, which I believe leads to people like me, the average consumer. Photographs, drawings, videos, and games that offer insight into how visual culture functions in the cloud. So that can be most related to, say, like our smartphones. Our smartphones are basically hubs for us. My smartphone, for example, is pretty, it's the most used device that I carry throughout the day. It's what I'm using to film this video right now. It's what I'm going to use to upload this video to YouTube tonight so that I can post the video onto Blackboard tomorrow morning for all of you guys to see. And it's just sort of like my gate into the cloud that is YouTube, the cloud that is Blackboard, so that I can communicate this unit to you all. We're all using the cloud to talk about the cloud. It's pretty meta. All right, 3 categories, and those are those are meant to be primary sources for the cloud. Okay, let's see. So, in talking about the cloud and how it works, again, it seems to be this very invisible thing, despite the fact that it relies on this physical stuff that from the reading, we've learned that these hard drives, these servers, and these computers and networks are stored in bunkers that used to be used for military purposes. Pretty intense. These bunkers, all of these hard drives, all of this information uses such an intense abundance of energy and creates all kinds of waste that is sort of hidden away and not really discussed. And this waste is something that the average consumer doesn't really consider. We try to be as conscientious of the waste that we're creating, but as possible. But when considering something like the cloud, which is seemingly invisible, something that's just there, it's a little hard to imagine something that's just there to produce waste. But an example from the reading, a quotation that I wanted to bring up is a quote from Greenpeace, which says that Apple, Amazon, and Microsoft are powering their 21st century clouds with dirty 19th century coal energy. And that was an interesting thing to read. This unit brought about a lot of things in regards to the cloud that I didn't really understand or think about before. This thing that's just sort of there, sort of like Wi-Fi, it's just sort of there. You rely on it so much and you don't really think about the other side of that, the underbelly of that. So that was really interesting to read. Another quote that I wanted to bring up was, well, not so much a quote, just sort of a topic from the reading. The author went on to discuss uses of the cloud for devious purposes. Jim Bell was a pretty intense example from the reading. He basically came up with what was called with assassination politics back in 1996. And what this was it's really like crazy to think about. Users could donate money to this assassination politics webpage or group. I forget exactly what it was described as, but when a politician who is deemed unsavory or unfit to be in politics was goodness, I'm not basically you could pay to kill someone, kill a politician, and that's a pretty insane thing to think about. And I wish that the reading got a little bit more specific as to like how many people participated in this, or even if it was an actual thing that was present. I think that this is kind of a scary thing to consider when discussing the cloud. Again, just like the waste that cloud services produce, it's also, scary to think about what lies within the cloud, such as things like assassination politics. If you don't like, say, I don't know, Donald Trump, if you don't care for Donald Trump, this system would be in place to where people can donate money to an assassin, in essence, who would claim that money as a reward once Donald Trump was taken care of. That's a very scary thing to think about, but it's an idea that is made possible through cloud services. And I suppose you can run with this sort of idea and apply any sort of crazy scenario as like something that is now made possible through the use of the cloud. And I think that this reading tends to lean to the negatives of the cloud. This was a very negative unit. It was really scary to consider all of these things that our author was talking about. I kept waiting for some sort of positivity or light to come in the reading in regards to the cloud and how it opens up the door for collaboration and building of the future. But it was just all of these really scary examples. Another thing that I wanted to bring up from the reading was the topic of the hacktivist. And those are essentially, I think, a really popular group that you would bring up, just like our reading brought up, would be the hacker group Anonymous. It's a group of people who hack websites and hack information and use that as a form of protest. And our reading has a quotation where it talks about hacktivism. I guess you could say people who are hacktivists. It is essentially a project to undermine the government, which looks like a security project that's meant to bolster the government. So it's interesting. You can kind of think of it as like something that goes both ways. These people who are hacking information in regards to politicians and the government are doing it to better the government and to make it work for the people and to make it work for the internet and services that rely on the internet for the greater good, as opposed to, all of the secrecy that goes on in the American government and, the underbelly of the cloud. Pretty negative stuff. And again, this reading was just full of this information that I never really considered before. Of course, we've also discussed negative things that happen throughout the use of internet services. I know we've talked about the likes of Logan Paul and things like that, and how we can be a little overwhelmed towards the constant introduction of new technology. And also about how, Sarah, you like to bring up hierarchical thinking a lot, and how that can kind of be negative for us, a detriment to us. A lot of that relates to, what we've read in this unit. And it just, in trying to find a positivity behind it, this reading was a little, I guess exhausting would be the word. So anyway, moving on to questions related to the reading. Another quote that I will bring up that will lead into a question that I want to propose to you all is in regards to the keyhole. And the keyhole denotes an absence that won't entirely reveal itself to us, and yet that absence is the reason we so fervently desire to know what it sees. So the keyhole is used as a metaphor, but it was also the name of a specific satellite that was in our reading. The keyhole, as you're observing through a keyhole in, metaphor, in essence, you can only see so much. But what you do see is revealing of something greater. It's a small piece of a large picture. So we, of course, crave to know the entire picture. What's behind that keyhole? The keyhole is right in front of what is keeping us from accessing the beyond. So my question is, why do we pursue this knowledge? What is the reason for it? Is it to categorize it? Is it to organize the chaos of the unknown? Is it to further the history of society and, potentially learning things that we don't know and understanding things that we don't know now? Will that better us as a society to be more prepared for the future? Do we feel that we deserve to know what we do not know? So I'm curious to see what you guys think in regards to the keyhole. Do you think that we inherently feel that we deserve to know what we don't know? Or should things be better left to the unknown? In the age of the cloud, in the age of the internet, it almost seems like everything is accessible. So is it all right that some things remain a secret? Or in the age of the internet, should everything just be open and obtainable for us? I'm curious to see what you guys think about that. Another question that I want to propose comes from the quote, "The cloud is a subtle weapon that translates the body into usable information." So the question that I wanted to propose from that is, what value do we have if to the cloud we are nothing but data? And for example, another thing that I could bring up from the reading was MAU, which I will refer to as Mao. Mao, in relation to the social media website Twitter, stands for monthly active users. And monthly active users on Twitter, on average, are worth around $78 each. So we, the users of the social media platform Twitter, are categorized in Mao, and that is a monetary value. So knowing that, does that make us less than individuals in the cloud's eyes? If all that we are when we're broken down is a monetary value for a social media platform, what does that mean for us as people, as a society? This idea, when you apply it to nearly anything else, no, does that apply to anything else? Do you think that corporations largely break us down into these statistics that have monetary value placed behind them? I would say yes. I wouldn't be so surprised to find out that even corporations that I support don't really place much value beyond individuals past a monetary value. You know, personally, that would be my answer to that question, but I'm curious to see what you guys think. What value do we have if to the cloud we are nothing but data? So questions that go beyond the rating, just to sort of further the discussion. I'm already at 20 minutes. I wanted to possibly talk about the Equifax hack that happened recently in the United States. You know, that was a pretty big deal. Social security numbers were made public by the millions. Accounts nationwide from nearly countless individuals were made public. And this has largely been deemed as something that was very preventable. And yet, for some reason, Equifax is still seen in a positive light. Equifax is still making money. As a business, they haven't really been hurt by the fact that all of our private information has been compromised. You know, like, for example, my social security number could have been stolen. I wouldn't know it. I would have to just pay that much more attention to my bank accounts and information because Equifax didn't protect my information as it very well could have. So that's a modern example of how the cloud has been hacked, possibly to make a point, because again, this was very preventable, but also possibly for malicious purposes. You know, we as people won't know until our information's stolen. It's a very scary thing to consider. Another example that I thought of was Celebgate. In a less classy way, it was called the Fappening. And that was recently when not all of, but iCloud accounts from celebrities and prominent people in the United States were hacked into, and personal photos were made public on the internet. Some of those personal photos were inappropriate in nature. Some of those photos were really private photos that weren't meant to be seen by people. And yet these photos were hacked and publicized, and just was a really big invasion of privacy. And that was as a result of hackers who accessed the Apple iCloud and just put this information everywhere, these photographs everywhere. Some of them were fake, some of them were real. People had to find themselves defending themselves to people on the internet from photos that were fake in some cases. So that's another really scary incidence of hacking the cloud that's happened. Another thing that we've talked about is Google and how it collects data on us, on our searches and our web browsing activity, and you know, it uses that data to push advertisements toward us, which largely, to me, like, for me personally, it's not too big of a deal because I largely ignore advertisements anyway. Like, I know that they're there, but I don't actively click on advertisements ever. If I'm ever looking for something to purchase on the internet, I'm looking it up solely because I want to buy it and I already know I want to buy it. But the point is that my information is being pooled. Say, you know, Google knows I like bow ties, and it knows that I like floral print shirts, and it probably knows that I need a haircut. So it's going to advertise things to me that pertain to those subjects. And to some people, that's a scary thing. You know, to me, it's just kind of like, oh, well, yeah, that makes sense. It's lame, but it makes sense. But to some people, it's really scary, and it's almost like an invasion of privacy. You know, we're being tracked by Google. And people are trying to sell us stuff and take advantage of our interests to make a buck. And that's a scary thing. Yeah. So a lot of questions, a lot of topics that I've brought up. This is a pretty big video submission, but it's also a presentation, so I guess it's supposed to be pretty big. Thank you guys. Feel free to play this video at twice the speed in order to get through it all. Probably should have said that at the very beginning, but anyway, I'm really looking forward to this week. I'm gonna wake up tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. to upload this video, and then I'm probably gonna go right back to bed. So that's exciting. Again, really excited to see what you guys say. Thanks for listening to me, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.